If one country comes under attack, then the other country shall lend assistance. And that was the clause that North Korea invoked to send troops to Russia.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars we end.
Right now, all eyes are on Washington. But who's actually watching Europe at the moment?
And the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says the death toll in Gaza is now more than 60,000 people since the start of the war.
I'm Roland Oliphant, and this is Battlelines. It's Monday, the 8th of September, 2025. They have ruled North Korea for 3 generations, and now Kim Jong Un, the third of the Kim leaders, appears to be grooming the next in line for the Supreme Leader's chair. Last week, he brought his 12-year-old daughter, Kim Jong-a, to Beijing, introducing her to the world as his heir apparent. At the same time, it emerged that US Navy SEALs had killed 3 North Koreans, probably civilians, in a botched raid on the country's coast several years earlier. What do these stories have in common? Well, according to the New York Times, which broke the story, the SEALs' mission was to plant a listening device to intercept Kim Jong Un's telephone calls. A desperate, high-risk attempt to gain insight into the infamously opaque Hermit dictatorship. So when we're asking questions like, who is Kim Jong-a? What do we know about her? What does her appearance tell us about North Korea today, its alliance with Russia and China, and her father's ambitions? And is North Korea even ready for a female leader? How can we even begin to answer them when even American intelligence cannot penetrate the country? Well, here at The Telegraph, we do not have a covert amphibious operations wing, or at least we don't have the budget for it. So instead, I turn to Rachel Minyoung Lee, a senior fellow at the Washington think tank 38 Degrees North, who's been studying North Korea for decades. Rachel, welcome to Battlelines. I was wondering, maybe we should just start by asking you to introduce yourself and a bit about your background. How does one become a North Korea watcher?
Before working for Stimson, I was a North Korea analyst, open source North Korea analyst with the U.S. government for 19 years, from 2000 to 2019, specializing in North Korean propaganda. So through North Korean propaganda, looking at basically all things North Korea, with the exception of science and technology and WMD in the military. So leadership, domestic politics, the economy, social, cultural developments, foreign policy, and inter-Korean relations.
I was looking at your bio. You earned your degree in Seoul. Are you yourself Korean?
I was born in Korea. I moved to the U.S. when I was 9, lived in the U.S. until I was 16, and then I moved back to Korea, and then I went to college, and I worked there for, 19 years.
Let's start with these remarkable scenes in Beijing last week, where Kim Jong Un shows up on his armored train, looking, as far as I could make out, looking quite relaxed and at ease, for what I believe was the first meeting of a North Korean, a Chinese, and a Russian leader since I think the 1950s or the 1960s or something like that. So a big moment for him, walking around next to, almost as an equal with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, which is pretty remarkable. But that isn't even what really caught our eyes. I mean, the person who caught our eyes was kind of behind his shoulder. It was this little, this girl in a smart dark trouser suit, who we are told is Kim Jong-a. We're told that she is his 12 or 13-year-old daughter, and that she may be his successor. Tell us about Kim Jong-a. What do we know about her, and how significant is her appearance? Is she really a dictator in waiting?
What we know about the daughter is through Dennis Rodman, former American basketball player who went to Pyongyang in 2013. At the time, he was introduced to the daughter that we are now seeing in the media. And according to Dennis Rodman, she was born around 2013. And the name that he heard from the North Koreans was Ju-a. Now, there are accounts from others who are familiar with North Korea that her name may actually be Ju-ye and not Ju-a. And this is not surprising because before Kim Jong Un made his public debut, for a long time we had thought that his name was Kim Jong Un. not Un. So there is a possibility that her name may be slightly different. We're actually going by what Dennis Rodman told the world.
Let me just get this straight. So we're all calling her Kim Ju-ae. We're spelling it with an A-E. And that's entirely from what Dennis Rodman said after he met the Kim family in 2013. North Korean media have not named her.
No, I'm afraid that's correct.
Good Lord.
So we are going by Dennis Rodman's account, and the intelligence agencies may know what her real name is, but we are at the moment going by what Dennis Rodman told us. Yes.
Okay. So tell us about her emergence, because it's gained a lot of traction. Even before she stepped off the train in Beijing, people had started to notice her. Tell us about her emergence and what we know and understand about her role in the regime.
We first saw Kim Ju-ae in November 2022. So she was around 9 years old or 10 years old at an ICBM launch site. And that was pretty shocking. And the reason that was shocking was because North Korean media had never done that before. And by that, I mean bringing out a young Kim child to the public eye. It is not unusual for children of the Kim family to accompany their father to places. The difference here is that North Korean media reported on her accompanying her father to an event and showing images of her doing that. So that was shocking to everyone. You're saying this is the first time in the entire Kim dynasty since the 1950s. So it's a real break of precedent here. Yes. A real, departure from past precedents. The fact that the media reported on her accompanying her father, right? So that was her public debut. As a 9 or a 10-year-old, she was a little girl at the time. So much smaller, much younger looking than she is now, right? Just a child at an ICBM test site.
And dressed as a child. I mean, in that photograph, she's kind of walking hand in hand with her dad, and she's wearing this big white puffer jacket, and the sleeves are too long for her. And if it weren't for the enormous missile in the background, it would look like a man going for a stroll with his daughter. Tell us about the evolution of this appearance then.
For a while, her public appearances were mostly confined to weapons and military-related events and sites. And then we started to see her public appearances broadening to other realms, right? So economic, social, cultural, and in May 2025, she made her diplomatic debut by accompanying her father, Kim Jong Un, to the Russian embassy in Pyongyang to commemorate Russia's Victory Day. So that was her diplomatic debut. And then that was followed by what we're talking about now, Kim Ju-ae appearing with her father in Beijing for the military parade. Of course, we have to be clear about this. We saw her stepping off of the train with her father, but she did not show up in any of the other events as far as we know.
This is interesting. So she suddenly emerges in this unprecedented way. From what you say, North Korean media haven't even used her name. So they're just showing these images of her without saying who she is. Then in May, she's taken to a diplomatic event for the first time at the Russian embassy. And I suppose in retrospect, that is her real introduction to the international scene, given what happened over the weekend.
Yes. So, the writing, I guess, was kind of on the wall. So it was only a matter of time based on her visit to the Russian embassy in Pyongyang that she would at some point start to accompany her father to diplomatic events. But even for that, I still thought her emergence in Beijing was quite the next level, because North Korea did that with the understanding about how it would be perceived at home and abroad, right? And that's what triggered all of this media interest around the world. It was like, it's surprising because I think I got more questions from journalists about the child, Kim Jong Un's daughter, than about the significance of Kim Jong Un's attendance or appearance or visit to Beijing for the military parade.
That's a fair point. And, mea culpa, I'm as guilty as anybody else. But look, I mean, you say it sounds like it's safe to assume that all of these public appearances are very carefully choreographed. They know what they're doing. They know how it's going to be perceived. The way it's been perceived, as we know simply from this conversation we're having, is that she's been anointed as his successor, as the next Kim who will rule North Korea. I suppose the question is that really what is happening here? Or is there some other reason for sending that message? Because that's definitely the message they're sending.
So we talked a little bit about the evolution of the daughter's appearances, right? First, she appears as sort of like a child, appearances fairly limited to military weapons-related sites and events, and then how the scope of her public appearances widened, right? There was a time for about, I would say about 8 months where she completely disappeared from the public eye. And then when she reappeared, it was very clear that she had received training on how to conduct herself, how to look more like a leader. So I think that was one of the reasons that's what triggered a lot of this speculation about how she is the successor. Otherwise, how do you explain this, right? There's no other explanation for it other than the fact that Kim Jong Un is probably training her to be the next leader of North Korea. And then, of course, you have her appearance with her father in Beijing for a major international event. From my point of view, I think it is possible that she is the successor. I'm still waiting to see more evidence that she is actually being groomed as the successor. It would be much, much easier if we had precedent, if we had at least one past example in North Korea's history where they have done this. By this, I mean bringing out a young Kim child. But we do not have that precedent, unfortunately. So I don't really know for sure where North Korea is going with this. All of this thinking out there about how she has to be the next successor, I see what that is based on, right? But again, I think we have to be careful about drawing that conclusion at this point. The other thing I would like to remind everyone of is that we're talking about a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, right? And Kim Jong Un, for all his health problems, is still around 41 years old. There are uncertainties, I would say. There's still time for other, I would say, factors or variables to arise. It could be that Kim Jong Un is thinking of his daughter as a successor or the successor, but I think that we need a little more time to arrive at that conclusion. So I'm just being the cautious, indecisive analyst here who is not really ready to make that call yet. If this is a succession campaign, it is being conducted in a very, very, very different way from the past two hereditary succession campaigns that we saw in the 70s and 80s, from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il. And in the 2000s, when we're seeing North Korea dropping hints of another hereditary succession in North Korea.
Is North Korea ready for a female supreme leader? I
think it can be. It depends on how good of a job the propaganda machinery does to prepare the population.
But there's nothing in kind of Korean culture that would say that's anathema, that can't be done.
If Kim Jong-un wants it done, he can get it done, right? Just because of the way the North Korean system works. But they would have to work, I think, hard for the population to get there as well. Because it is a very conservative, patriarchal society. It's like what South Korea was 50, 60 years ago, right? And it hasn't been that long since we've started to see more women in leadership positions in North Korea. For example, Choi Sun-hee, who is the foreign minister, and it's a she. First North Korean female foreign minister. And of course, there's North Korea, Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, who is pretty high profile. You don't see that many females in leadership positions. So it's pretty much still a conservative society. So I think the propaganda would have to do a good job.
So what would you be looking for if you're waiting for more confirmation? What kind of signs would you be looking for before you say, okay, yes, I think she is the anointed successor?
Well, if we're going back to past examples from Kim Il-sung to Kim Jong-il, and again from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un, I think we would be looking for certain formulations that pop up in North Korean propaganda. So, for example, in the 2000s, when North Korea was testing the waters, maybe even putting a trial balloon out there to see what the elite of the regime might be thinking about hereditary succession, and then the public, we saw certain like vague, almost mysterious formulations, right? Signals like the bloodline of Mount Baekdu. The first time it started appearing in the early 2000s, we didn't know quite exactly what that was. So it took a while for us to figure out what that was, because they would sometimes use, interesting formulations that we had not seen before, but then they lead to nothing. In this particular case, it turned out to be something. So something like that in maybe a particular form of writing. So in the 2000s, again, we started to see this formulation, the bloodline of Mount Baekdu, in what we call the political essay in Rodong-Sinmun, which is the party daily, the most important and authoritative newspaper in the country. But again, it took some months and years to figure out exactly what they were doing at the time.
Okay, and Mount Baekdu, for the lay people amongst us.
It's a symbolic place in North Korean leadership propaganda, closely connected to the Kim family. So that Mount Baekdu is for that reason, symbolic in North Korean propaganda. And of course, the word bloodline too. So that to us signaled that they were talking about the Kim family, but we just didn't know at the time that that was meant to be part of a succession campaign.
I think that's a fascinating insight into how difficult the job is you're trying to do. You're literally parsing kind of newspaper articles or essays for new phrases to kind of guess what they might mean. I mean, that gives us a sense of how difficult it is to penetrate and understand what's going on there.
One of the greatest temptations in North Korean propaganda analysis is that almost everything every day seems interesting because they say interesting things and sometimes funny things. So there is a tendency to maybe say, this may mean something, this seems interesting. But when you do the research, it may be that it's not that new, or that it may not mean much. So, this tendency to maybe latch on to something that they say, right? Like piecemeal information and overparse it, or maybe taking it completely out of context because you think that makes sense, right? You think it makes sense to analyze it in a certain way. I would say that the hardest part, two parts, the hardest two things about North Korean media analysis is really, number one, parsing historical data, like really going back by 10, 20, even 30 years sometimes to make sense of what they may be doing now. And then secondly, contextualizing what you're seeing now correctly. A lot of the analysis that we see out there about North Korea sometimes mixes the contextualization part because of this tendency that I'm just talking about, which is taking the thing that's right in front of you now and trying to make sense of just that one thing. Which could lead us astray analytically.
After the break, North Korea has sent troops to fight for Russia in Ukraine. But does that mean Russia would send troops to fight for North Korea in the Pacific? Welcome back. Let's turn back to that thing that you accused us thoroughly guilty journalists of ignoring, which is set aside Kim Joo-ae and whether she is going to be the next Kim dictator. What about for Kim himself? What did you make of the significance of this moment? Because it is, I suppose it's remarkable really for Kim Jong Un. He's seen walking down, a red carpet as one with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. What do you make of the significance of this moment and what does it mean for him?
I think that this was as you mentioned, remarkable, very significant, and so smart And I don't mean that to laud the North Korean regime or anything. I have to be careful because when you say, something positive about North Korea, some people will call you out for being like a pro-North Korea person. But no, I think from Kim Jong Un's point of view, everything he did made sense. And it's exactly in line with what we have seen in North Korean propaganda in terms of where they were going. I don't think you need anything else but just those images that you described of Xi Jinping standing in the middle with Putin on one side and Kim Jong Un on the other side. The message here for North Korea watchers is that North Korea not only has stakes in this anti-US, anti-West movement, but that it is a key player in that. That in some sense, it's not just following China and Russia in this anti-US, anti-West movement, but that it is actually taking the lead in it. I think that's the message that I personally got. And I think that was the message that North Korea was hoping to give. This is unfortunate because it will become so much harder. I think things have become much more difficult, on the nuclear negotiations front. It was already very difficult before this event. This was a milestone in the sense that it, aside from the messaging, I think it's also the way North Korea views itself in the world, right? The feeling of being emboldened, the feeling of being empowered, that will make things much more difficult for the United States to negotiate with the North Koreans going forward. It's a matter of time, in my opinion, because before we see a summit between Kim and Trump. In Kim Jong Un's mind, he can have a summit with President Trump anytime. But it will be at a time of his choosing and on his terms. We will probably not see a summit this year. For one thing, there aren't that many months left, right? And this is the last year for North Korea to finish all of the tasks laid out during the 8th Party Congress, which was held in January 2021. This is the last year for completing all of the plans. And
what are those tasks?
Across everything, from economic, political, military. There was a whole laundry list of weapons that North Korea wanted, that Kim Jong Un wanted developed and produced between then, 2021, and by the end of 2025. So they still have some things that they have to do. So I think North Korea will spend the rest of the year focusing on getting those things done so that they can start the 9th Party Congress, which probably will be held at the beginning of next year, on a high note. After the 9th Party Congress has been held, and that's where they will, sort of lay out their domestic policy, foreign policy for the next 5 years. And so I think after the 9th Party Congress, we should look out for maybe signs of North Korea taking an interest in a summit with Trump.
Okay, sometime next year then.
Yes.
Let's talk about that because he's met Trump, I think, twice before. There was a meeting in Hanoi, I think, in Vietnam in 2019, and then I think they met briefly on the line of contact. The Hanoi summit didn't go that well. Remind us what happened there, and can you give us a sense of what Kim and what the North Koreans made of that summit? Because we've heard a lot about, Donald Trump wanted to make a deal and then he left. We kind of know what the Americans feel about it. But what's the North Korean kind of feelings about what happened then and therefore about Donald Trump today?
What we know is that North Korea put the Yongbyon nuclear facility on the table.
Tell us about that nuclear facility. What is it?
One of the main nuclear facilities in North Korea. In exchange for that, North Korea wanted sanctions relief. Donald Trump, I think, may have been willing to go for that, but then I think at the last minute they said, well, we want everything. We want everything frozen, everything declared, and, everything dismantled, right? We want the whole 9 yards, not just the Yongbyon, including your chemical weapons facilities, right? That was not something North Korea was prepared for, I think. And so it fell apart. I think North Korea blames the South Korean government at the time for this, because I think North Korea was informed by the South Korean government that Yongbyon would be enough for a deal. And it turned out that it was not. It's fascinating to see the change in North Korea's attitude towards South Korea after the collapse of the Hanoi summit, the first public statement from North Korea about South Korea after the collapse of the Hanoi summit contained the word betrayal. So I think North Korea felt betrayed. They took it personally. And I think they blamed a lot of that on the South Korean government. And whose repercussions we are seeing today with Kim Jong Un's two Koreas policy and their sort of animosity towards South Korea.
I think you told me in our conversation the other day that Hanoi really was a turning point for Kim, in a way.
It was. I think it had a far-reaching sort of psychological impact on Kim Jong Un. And I think it was a turning point in the sense that it probably gave the North Korean leadership pause, in terms of what the United States means for North Korea in the longer term.
Do you mean there was a real chance of an opening or a real chance of Kim Jong Un braving some kind of opening or thaw with the United States, and that he's had second thoughts now? He just doesn't trust them anymore.
I don't think he trusts the United States. So Hanoi summit forced the North Korean leadership to really think hard about, do we really need the United States? Right? What can the United States do for us? Will anything we offer to the Americans, will any of that be good enough? And I think the second turning point really was the U.S. pullout from Afghanistan in the summer of 2021. I think that was a case in point for the North Koreans that U.S. leadership on the world stage was not what it used to be. And so I think that sort of further reinforced their thinking that maybe the U.S. may not be as important to them. This thinking is probably not something that every North Korea watcher would subscribe to, because I think there still is some thinking out there that the North Koreans still think that the U.S. is vital for its regime survival. But I think we may be beyond that point now. And I think the pictures, the images that we saw emerge out of Beijing, a few days ago with Kim Jong Un standing right next to Putin and Xi Jinping reinforces that.
It's a remarkable turnaround, I think, given in the 2010s at least, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were fully behind the Americans in slapping sanctions on North Korea about their nuclear program. And now they're welcoming him with open arms. Do you think we've underestimated Kim Jong Un? Is he actually something of a diplomatic genius?
I think we tend to underestimate North Korea as a whole. And, I don't think it's good to overestimate anything or anyone that we're trying to analyze, but at the same time, underestimating can be just as risky. When Kim Jong Un first came to power at the end of 2011, a lot of analysts were saying that we should give Kim Jong Un a lot of things to think about, like simultaneously, right? Create a lot of trouble or, a lot of issues for him so that he's scrambling, so that it makes it hard for him to make the right decisions. Some analysts were, actually putting that out there as a policy recommendation, but I think we all turned out to be wrong, or many of us turned out to be wrong. I think what we are seeing is a person who was much, much better trained to lead the country. One of the reasons why people thought that he was not as well prepared as he should have been was because, unlike his father, he didn't have many years to prepare for the transition. Kim Jong-il had decades of training under his father, but Kim Jong-un did not. And that was the reason why many people were thinking that many people underestimated Kim Jong-un. I mean, just look at him in Beijing. He was at ease. He may have been nervous, but if he was, we didn't see that. I mean, that was his debut on a multilateral diplomatic stage with 20 plus leaders. And him standing next to Xi Jinping and Putin, and he seemed very natural to me. The way that they read the international political situation, the way they take opportunity of these rifts, right, between China and the US, between the US and Russia, all of it is just remarkable. They haven't made that many mistakes, in my opinion, from their point of view. The geopolitical situation is just in such favor to the North Koreans. And for all, again, that goes back to our point about the nuclear negotiations will make it very difficult.
Can you tell us a bit about his relationship with Xi Jinping and with Vladimir Putin? I mean, he looked very chummy, as you say, he looked very confident and smiling and at ease and as if he was in amongst his equals. But they're much bigger countries and they're really kind of his patrons. What do you think they make of him? And what do you think is really going through each of those three men's heads behind the smiles?
I don't think North Korea trusts China and Russia. The history is very complex, right? Despite all the warm, positive language from North Korea about North Korea-Russia relations, and Kim certainly seems to have rapport with Putin. North Korean media ran images of Kim Jong Un in Putin's limo the other day, in Beijing. They have this bromance thing going on. So it's very clear that they have rapport. But for all of that, I don't think that North Korea trusts or completely trusts Russia. Same thing with China. From North Korea's point of view, Russia and China play different roles. They play these complementary roles. So it would be good to have both of them on North Korea's side. I would have said, if anyone had asked me a few weeks ago whether I thought that Kim Jong Un was going to go to Beijing for the military parade, I probably would have said no. And I would have been wrong. And the reason I would have said no was because based on my reading of North Korean propaganda and its handling of China, I saw some signs that maybe they may have been warming up to the Chinese. But then I saw this one report at the end of July that was very cold. It was a report about Kim Jong Un going to the Friendship Tower, which commemorates fallen Chinese soldiers during the Korean War. It was very, very short and frigid. And so I would have said, yeah, there's no way. There's no way he's going to China. But he did. It's just really fascinating how he takes advantage of these opportunities for the national interest. It was a good photo op standing next to leaders of these two great powers. But also, his debut on the multilateral diplomatic stage, it was an opportunity for Kim Jong Un to meet with a lot of these countries that North Korea would call like-minded countries. So countries like Vietnam, Mongolia, Belarus. We heard about Kim Jong Un extending an invitation to the Belarusian president for a visit to Pyongyang. So all in all, I think he made the right move.
As I understand, part of the reason you were surprised that he went to Beijing was because there seems to have been some kind of enormous spat between China and North Korea over the past 2 years, a noticing, frostiness in relations. And as I understand, we don't actually know what caused that.
We do not know for sure. I can only guess that China refused to do something that North Korea asked. But that's purely my guess. That certainly is not something you would find in open source intelligence.
Even on the Chinese side, we're in the dark as to exactly why there seemed to be a little bit of a crisis there between the two countries.
That's my understanding. Nobody that I've talked to really knew what was going on.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? It's extraordinary how opaque it is. Just a few questions that I think our listeners would really like answers to. Why did he send troops to Ukraine?
Because North Korea had more to gain, right? Simply put, they had more to gain by sending troops and losing some than not sending them. The battlefield experience, right? Modern warfare, exposure to that is something that they have not had. And quite frankly, South Korea has not had that. So, that which would give North Korea an advantage over the South Koreans. The way that certain weapons are used on the battlefield, for example, drones. North Korea has shown a lot of interest in drones of late, and I don't think that that's a coincidence. Military modernization, maybe Kim Jong Un thought that there were some lessons to be learned from Russia. I don't think it's a coincidence that Kim Jong Un has been calling for military modernization a lot in recent months. So I think he had these things to gain. I think he was banking on, gaining that experience, the exposure, and then those commanders coming back home and then giving the North Korean military a readout and for North Korea to actually take lessons from and implementing. A lot of people had talked about cash, like maybe a couple $1,000s for each soldier. If there were cash transactions for these soldiers, I would venture to guess that maybe those were a minor factor. We're talking about a country that makes millions of dollars off of cryptocurrency, theft and whatnot.
They have other income streams, in other words.
I think he had his eye on a bigger prize.
How is all this viewed from South Korea, and how do we assess kind of his appetite for for a potential future conflict. I was speaking to another Korean analyst who pointed out that I think last year he dropped the long-term goal of unification of the peninsula that his father and grandfather had pursued, but he apparently did not at all rule out, conquest in the event of war. He just seemed to be saying that South Korea is just another country and it's a particularly hostile country. And if we do fight them, we'll absorb them. Is he a dangerous man? I mean, how likely is he to start a war?
I think the possibility of misjudgment, miscalculation is definitely there. And I think the fact that Kim Jong Un now feels more emboldened for all the reasons that we just talked about does not decrease that possibility. I think that only increases the possibility of Kim Jong Un becoming more maybe brash. However, we should also take note that North Korea can manage escalation when it wants to. And one example is in October 2024, when North Korea claimed that the South Korean military had sent drones into Pyongyang airspace. It's looking more and more like that did happen, that the South Korean military indeed, at the direction of the then defense minister, sent drones into North Korea. So North Korea could have escalated if it wanted to. The capital's airspace had been violated, right? But it did not. And I think the main reason for that was because that was when North Korea was dispatching its first batch of troops to Russia. I don't think North Korea wanted to rock the boat, so to speak. I think it needed stability. So it did not escalate. I mean, we saw some angry statements from the North Koreans, but we didn't see them escalating. We saw them actually taking steps toward de-escalating. After a few angry statements, they didn't take any action. So I think that's an example of where North Korea can manage escalation if it wants to. Now, the problem is that if there is a domestic need for escalating conflict or escalating tensions, a domestic or external reason for doing that, then I think we are in trouble, because I think we're looking at a country that feels emboldened. Russia is now in the Northeast Asia picture, whether we like it or not. I'm not sure how much military assistance the Russians will provide North Korea in case of a conflict on and around the Korean Peninsula, given the fact that Russia didn't take much action when Iran came under attack, Israel and the U.S. recently, or the fact that it didn't do much when the Assad regime went down and under in Syria at the end of last year. But still, more than before, in recent history, Russia is in the picture. North Korea-Russia treaty signed in 2024 has a clause that says if one country comes under attack, then the other country shall lend assistance, right? Military or otherwise. And that was the clause that North Korea invoked, that Kim Jong Un invoked to send troops to Russia. So North Korea definitely can ask Russia for help because it helped Russia.
The New York Times has an extraordinary story just before the Hanoi summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un. The US Navy SEALs mounted a failed infiltration into North Korea, ended up killing the crew of a boat, probably civilians, and running away. The stakes of simply doing that are remarkable. What do you make of that? When you saw that, what does that say about the state of relations and talks and everything else?
I was shocked when I read that report. I think the timing is, in a way, unfortunate for the Trump administration, because we know that President Trump wants talks with Kim Jong Un. In fact, just a couple weeks ago when he was meeting with the South Korean president in Washington, D.C., re-engagement with North Korea, U.S.-North Korea summit was what dominated the agenda. So timing-wise, this is unfortunate. And also just the fact that this article comes on the heels of all of the images that we saw, from Beijing, the reinforcement of a North Korea, China, Russia bloc, if you will, although bloc may not be the right word to use for some people. It would be interesting to see how, if North Korea reacts to the New York Times article, for one, and B, if it does, and how it reacts to it. I think this would reinforce the idea in Pyongyang, right, within the top leadership, that the U.S. cannot be trusted. This hostile policy by the United States toward North Korea, and that regardless of who's in the White House, that's not going to change.
One of the really telling things about it is that the SEAL's mission was to install basically an eavesdropping device because it was so impenetrable, so impossible to understand what the Koreans wanted, because US intelligence was having the same difficulty we all have in understanding what's going on there. I thought that was really telling. What's our best understanding at the moment of what's going on inside North Korea? How is life? How is the economy? What are people talking about? I find North Korea completely different to countries, the other countries we've mentioned, Russia, China, maybe Iran. These are all countries that, okay, it's a bit hostile. You can go there. You can ring up a retired professor at a university. You can talk to ex-diplomats. The regime will talk to you. You'll get a sense of what's going on. You could go to Moscow or Beijing or Tehran and just soak up the atmosphere, right? What's it like in North Korea right now, as far as we can tell?
So for the reason that you cited, that North Korea is a fortress in a way, you can't go there to just meet people, right? This is where the importance of open source intelligence really comes in, especially for a country like North Korea, because you have no other avenues by which to gather information. So what we know based on open source, reporting from North Korea is that I don't see any immediate signs of regime instability in North Korea. Sure, you have the chronic, economic challenges. North Korea has been stepping up efforts to improve the people's livelihoods. And I think their standards of living have gone up definitely over the years, but not really where Kim Jong Un wants it to be. I think that there are longer term challenges for the regime, in terms of keeping up the system, right? In terms of defending the system the way they want it to. So potential risks, I think, are mainly to Kim Jong Un's health and how well they prepared they are for the next leadership. And secondly, the preservation of socialism. I do think that that's on the top of the North Korean leaders' minds. How long can they keep this up? A lot of North Koreans have already had exposure to outside world information. One of the reasons why North Korea or Kim Jong Un decided to adopt this two Koreas policy, really giving up the notion of peaceful unification with South Korea, really is because North Korea wanted to, nip in the bud any hope for unification. And this is because of the prevalence of South Korean culture. A lot of people over the years in North Korea have watched South Korean dramas, movies. They like to dress the way South Koreans dress. The hairstyles. So you'll sometimes see in North Korean newspaper articles, they'll warn against certain types of fashion, for example. Don't wear short skirts, don't wear tight, trousers, what have you. So, there's a reason why they do that. They're afraid.
That's really interesting. K-pop can get through the DMZ.
Yes. And it's much more dangerous than we gave it credit for, apparently.
You've been listening to Rachel Minyoung Lee, Senior Fellow at the Washington think tank 38 Degrees North. That's all for this week. We'll be back on Friday with our usual updates. Until then, that was Battlelines. Goodbye. Battlelines is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles and hosted by me, Roland Oliphant, and Venetia Rainey. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Battlelines on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others to find the show. To stay on top of all our news, subscribe to The Telegraph, sign up to our Dispatches newsletter, or listen to our sister podcast, Ukraine the Latest. You can also get in touch directly by emailing battlelines@telegraph.co.uk or contact us on X. You can find our handles in the show notes. The producer is Peter Shevlin, and the executive producer is Louisa Wells.